Welcome everyone to this webinar presented by the Eastern Suburbs Regional Group of the Order of Australia Association. So it was a great joy to be able to welcome Dan Collins, who was introduced to us by one of our committee members, David Langworthy. David spoke in glowing terms about your background and skills, Dan, and so it was good to hear from him that you had accepted the invitation to join us. I did a bit of looking up to find out a little bit about Dan because I must confess I'm not a great follower of the Olympics. So I was interested to find out that Dan had been a participant in 4 Olympic Games: in Barcelona in 1992, Atlanta in 1996, Sydney in 2000, and Athens in 2004. And over those 4 sets of games, he was the recipient of both a bronze medal and a silver medal associated with kayak work. Maybe Dan might tell us something about that. But that was back 20 years ago, and since then Dan has developed into a high-performance manager and fitness expert, talking to groups and organisations about how to rise to the top of the field. So without further ado, Dan, I'll hand over to you and we look forward to what you have to say to us. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, Jeffrey, and I'm glad that David's recommendation got through. So I'm looking forward to sharing a few things with you. So in doing so, I think what I'd like to try and have a conversation with you guys about is how I think about service and how I think about work that's deeply embedded in my athletic background. So it's probably left a field conversation to most, but I take my work seriously and I enjoy the work I do. But it's deeply embedded in the experiences I've had because of being an athlete and then working as a leader or administrator and leader in sport. So how I've got to this point is certainly a strong part of my heritage. So I think the concept I'd like to introduce to you is the idea that what I call the Sherpa Initiative. So I run a business where we predominantly focus on performance partnerships, and those performance partnerships sit alongside the CEOs and executive teams of small business right through to really large ASX listed companies in Australia. So I've done work with businesses that are only say 30 people in size, right up to the giants of Woolworths and Coles and the like. So the concept of the Sherpa Initiative, I'm really passionate about, because what it means is walking alongside in helping others be successful. So if you think about the Sherpas, Tenzing Norgay isn't a famous name to most people, but Sir Edmund Hillary certainly is. But Tenzing Norgay was the person that helped him get to the destination top of Mount Everest. And the concept of the Sherpa Initiative, where you're supporting strongly or being in the service of someone else, helping them be successful and serving that way, I'm really passionate about. But I think to trace back a little bit about my story of why I think that's really important, it's probably worthwhile starting where I started, and there's 3 parts of my adult life. So I'll just share this photo with you. There's 3 parts of it. So the first part is obviously as an Olympic athlete. There's a photo there of just after the Sydney Olympics with my dad, and actually that's my eldest son with me. And Jeffrey, you talked about going to 4 Olympics. My eldest son in this photo, that's Jackson. He won a silver medal in Paris last year. So, and that's probably my
my proudest sporting moment. Those of you with kids would appreciate that, right? So, but yeah, what sport taught me to be able to help others. There's a few things I think about what sport really taught me. So one is the deep concept of personal responsibility, and I learned this at my first Olympic Games. My first Olympics was Barcelona, and I did terribly. It was a really bad Olympics for me, and it was my first, and I was very fortunate. If you have a really bad first Olympics, you don't really normally you don't get a second chance. But my physical attributes were way in front of my mental capabilities at that point. So I gained selection because nature gave me a lot of resources that enabled me to compete at a very high level. But when I ran into similar gifted athletes in an environment that was highly pressurized for extended periods of time, it didn't bode well. And slowly but surely, the things that needed to be in place for me to perform under pressure for an extended period of time, they weren't in place in my life. And they certainly, by the time I got to the village was the last part of the undoing of me in 1992. For those of you who don't know much about the village, it's an amazing place. 16 days. Everyone you look at is good at what they do. So imagine that, walking into an environment where there's no one who's not good at what they do, and they're the very world's best. So it's really rarefied atmosphere. And but one of the things I didn't know about the village when I got there was everything's for free. Like, you don't pay for anything once you're inside. So 16 days of a fully gated community, 10,000 of the world's best athletes in the one place at the one time. And by this time, I'd probably well and truly lost my way. And I think there's a few things I could do for Australia. Kayaking obviously was one, but I think I could eat for Australia as well, or eat ice cream for Australia anyway. It was Magnum ice creams was my undoing in the village. They were placed in freezer tops every 250 metres, and you could just go and help yourself at any time of the day. And of course, slowly but surely, over the course of, by the time I got to the second week when we competed, I'd managed to put on, about half a kilo of already being slightly overweight compared to what I was at the trials. And the reason why I did that was because I just wasn't ready for that level of competition. There was a range of things, and I was taught a very important lesson at those Olympic Games, and it's one that I think all of us need to learn, is that's this concept of you own your results, you own your outcomes, you own the way you prepare, and a lot of energy needs to go into the concept of personal responsibility. Imagine a scenario where the majority of the people that we worked with and work for had high levels of personal responsibility and integrity. And I don't think we talk about it enough. I don't think we teach it enough. And it's certainly something that sport taught me right from an early days. And the leadership around the care that was put into me when I got home from the Olympic Games. I was down in Tasmania, and the boss of or the director of the Tasmanian Institute of Sport at that time was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Franks. Did an amazing job, and she took me to lunch one day on a Friday afternoon and just said, "Hey, look, Barcelona was a bad experience for you. What happened?" And of course, I started talking about all the excuses and all the things that went wrong. She said, "Hey, let's write all those down." And we wrote them all down. And I had about 7.5 pages of a book of all the things that went wrong from March in 1992 to August in 1992. And the next exercise she started with me is, "Hey, let's just," and she did so with enthusiasm. I was walking into my own trap. "Hey, let's cross off all the things that you didn't have control of." And we read out the first one, and I started to argue the toss, and she explained to me, "No, you had a fair bit of control over that." And then as we went through the list, slowly but surely, I realised much to my sadness and anger and frustration, that most of the things on the list were on me. And then it was a really important lesson, and I left that over the weekend and did some amazing soul searching as a 21 or 22-year-old at that point. And where I landed was, and if I was going to be good at this thing at the elite level, then I needed to take deep personal responsibility for my results and how I conducted myself. And the thing that I'm most proud of from my athletic career is from 1993 to the year 2000, in a sport that's decided by fractions of a second. So to give you an example, in 1996 at the Olympic Games, there's 2 semi-finals. There's 9 boats in each. So nine boats. The first 4 from each semi-final and the fastest 5th across the field goes through to the final. After the semi-finals, between 1st and 15th, there was only 1.2 seconds in the field. So it's fractions of seconds, right? It's really tight racing. But from 1993 to 2000, I wasn't off the dais. I managed to be on the dais all the time in those. And I think what got me there was this concept of, personal responsibility, which allowed me to be held to account to very, very high standards with the people I was working with, whether it's sports scientists or coaches or dietitians. So I think for me, it was a horrible, horrible moment, but in hindsight, probably the most important lesson. So, and it led to this wonderful photo here of, that's Dad and another future silver medalist at the Sydney, for me at Sydney Olympics, which was what I thought at that point at the end of my career. So I think the first lesson that helps me be really good in serving others in my journey is the sport taught me about pressure, and it taught me about being good in clutch moments, but this concept of owning your results and owning your preparation, it's one of the things that I don't let people off the hook of when I work with, and I think I'm doing them a great service to helping them be accountable to really high standards, to the values of your organisation or whatever it is. So that's I suppose my first story. This second photo is Mr. Howard, and it was my second part of my ability to, I think, to learn and be of use to others in the corporate sector was I worked for the Australian Sports Commission and also in the NRL, in the AFL and international rugby as a sports leader and administrator. And making the transition from being an athlete into being a leader of that environment was really difficult, because I had to let go of so many of my personal ambitions. So I'm sure that you guys understand this through your own leadership journeys. But one of the things that is really important for leaders to let go of is their personal ambition. And how you get meaning from work is being really useful to others. And the thing that I think I learned most in my tenure, I had 12 years of being in elite sport as a leader and administrator, is learning how to use my knowledge to create the right conditions for other people to be at their best. So there's this journey that you take, I think, from being really ambitious as an individual, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's really important. But where that ambition needs to end up from a leadership perspective, I think, is being useful for others by creating the conditions where they can be at their best. So what are those, creating that environment that helped athletes rise to the top of what they were doing, or reach personal goals, or even get the most out of themselves. And one of the things I did, which was really cool, it was such an amazing opportunity. I did some work when soccer, before the A-League, soccer was all the soccer clubs, all the football clubs around Australia, they were, for want of a better term, they were ethnically based. So it's like Sydney Marconi, or so they had these. So before the A-League, it was very much a competition that was exclusive unless I was part of that tribe. It wasn't. It was very difficult to be part of, and there was enormous amount of bad will right around the country in the sport. And so there's no reason. That's the reason, I think, in the most part, that it didn't do well. And I got the opportunity to do a review and give recommendations to the Australian Sports Commission of the systems and structures back in the day that needed to change for soccer to be successful. And at this point, I was working with the Australian Sports Commission, and I was learning a lot about the administration and the system that generates wonderful results in sport. And that report ended up leading the way for the total revamp and the birth of the A-League and the scratching of what was Soccer Australia at that point, and reconditioning and decommissioning the sport and reapproaching it. And Mr. Howard was really at the centre of that. I was very fortunate to do some work with him. I also, apart from cricket, I also write, when he went to a sporting event, I used to write his, you'd have to have a brief, he'd go to the different sporting events. So I'd write a lot of his briefs for the different events he'd go to. So I was very fortunate in my sporting, my post-sporting career to get the opportunity to work in sport. But the big thing for me that it taught me was how do I be useful to others in creating an environment where they can be at their best? And I think it ties into the concept of the Sherpa Initiative. And then lastly, the photo there is what I do now, is help corporate groups and help organisations create the right teams, build environments where we've got great leadership alignment, make sure that if I look at right down to the front line, what are the mental skills we need to help people with, so they're really good at work. And I come back to why is this so important to me? Because I think I look at work as our contribution to the world. And the more useful I am to the world, the more value I can create for me and for others. And that concept of creating value, if we can teach people who are at every level of the business how to be a winner at their level, it sets them up for either staying there and reaching mastery of their role, or being able to move to whatever next level that they want to achieve from their leadership perspective. I figure there's a couple of things that we want to solve for when we're doing that. And I'll just share this slide with you. Is that actually, I'll move to the next one. If I look at, I think there's three things that we really want to work with people on, and the first one is we all have personal character weaknesses. You know, like there's but yet very few of us are open to discussing what those are when in a pressurized environment, and we seem to want to protect ourselves from the fact that, hey, let's look in first. And that's, again, that first lesson that came to me around being personally responsible. So therefore, having a healthy relationship with accountability and a healthy relationship with failure. So if I come back to this first point, is that so many of us miss the opportunity to look at our character weaknesses. And I think it's one of the greatest harmful things for leaders, because under pressure, we make poor decisions based on either one of two things. We're stressed and we can't handle the pressure. So we don't have both the mental skills and the physical vitality to sustain over a journey, or we have character flaws that get in the way of our decision making and being useful to others and being really good for our business. The second area that I think is a leader's ability to build a high functioning team. I love teams. I absolutely love teams. It's the ability to be part of a team and have the team help me be better at what I do. I don't reckon there's a better feeling. Like when you're at work, if you're working with a bunch of people that are really charging towards a set of results or to try and deliver a project, I don't think there's a better feeling. It inspires me to work with others. And I don't understand people who don't like teams. I don't get it. I mean, some people just don't love working by themselves. But I think teams are incredible and they're uplifting. And I also think that if you look at it, none of the big problems we've got in the world are solved by individuals. They're all solved by people who work together. So teams are vital in my summation, and executives really need to be very good at building a high functioning executive team and then having a wonderful team of teams within their organisation. And then the last one I think is it's so difficult to, in my view, gain alignment for everyone in the business. So and sports really taught me about commitment to a cause, and my grounding both as an athlete and then as a leader and administrator in sport has taught me so much about being committed to a cause and aligned to the values and aligned to the results that we're trying to achieve. And that alignment, I don't know if we fight hard enough for that. And that's everywhere. I think alignment is really an important part of family life. We have dinner around the table as often as we can in my household, and the reason for that is to help each other get an understanding of each other, but also of how we can help to help each other achieve and celebrate success and those sorts of things. And so it can happen at a micro level, but alignment to the values of the organisation, the things that we're trying to achieve, and ultimately the journey where the business is trying to get to. I don't know if there's a thing that pulls an organisation apart more than misaligned teams or individuals who place themselves above the business or the success of the team. So those three for me are the three areas that, given my background and given my heritage, that I think is really useful. And anything taken from today that you might want to pick up on, I think those three things are vitally important to help people be successful: is a strong personal character and a sense of personal responsibility, the leader's ability to build teams and the conditions around those teams that help that team be very useful for the organisation. Then lastly, everyone needs to be aligned to the results and values within the organisation. And just a little bit on that I find too, so many of organisations pluck their values from I don't know where actually, so they don't align their the results they're trying to achieve with the values of the organisation. And I'll give a personal example of this. Is on the Gold Coast, there's the Australian Institute of Sport Canoe Kayak Unit, and its job and its primary purpose is to create amazing athletes to compete at an international level. Right now, my eldest son is competing in the Australian Surf Lifesaving Championships, which are on the Gold Coast. So, and he's involved in Kurrawa Surf Club, and he goes and does patrols like so many of us in surf lifesaving do. We get our 30 to 40 hours of patrolling the beaches and volunteer patrols on the weekend. Through his surf club, he gets to compete. So he gets to compete on the weekends, but the values of Australian surf lifesaving are very different to the values of the Australian Institute of Sport Canoe Kayak Unit, and they're derived primarily because they're after different results. And I think so many of we pick our values and then our results come second, whereas I think our values should be picked, our values or considered. What values do we need to align to the results that we're after for the organisation or for the team? And Australian Surf Lifesaving is all their results, so the things they're trying to achieve is all about keeping our beaches safe. So surf lifesaving clubs have a very different feel to it because their values are different, yet we do exactly the same thing. We're involved in paddling and surf sports and the like, but for the purpose of being fit and healthy to save lives, whereas the canoe kayak unit, it has a completely different feel to it. It's ferocious, it's fierce, it's highly energised, and probably not as friendly as as a surf lifesaving club. But the values are different because the results that they're after, two sets of results are different, and we get lots of values misalignment around businesses and small businesses because we're not really clear on the results we're after, and those results should then determine the values that we pick. And that contradicts, I think, a lot of people's views when it comes to being and serving the community. But I think your values and your results need to align, and the results that you want for people need to come first. In my view, it's just a view. Guys, I think at this point I've been going for about 30 minutes. I know it's hard to listen online, so maybe there's an opportunity if there's any things that you'd like to pick up on that we could. I've got more to share, but I'm also really mindful that maybe it's a good opportunity to have a more free-flowing conversation around some of the concepts that I've introduced.
Right. Well, thanks, Dan. There's probably a good point then to stop and see if there are any comments or questions from people.
I total agreement with you on the importance of teams and what you're doing.
Right. Thank you. I think the teams are, and again, it's a view, right? So it's easily debatable. But if I go to this, I've actually got a slide around teams. So I'll share this with you, and I think building high performing teams at the centre of it is we get confused about teams. I think or what they are, and if I look at the conditions, so in the centre of that model, there's three things that are really important. So for me, a real team is it's actually small enough to convene. So I think when we talk about teams and how that can energise any business or any community, small teams of people are like you almost have this team of teams approach. So we're currently talking to Woolworths around, you're not a team. Woolworths as a whole is not a team. I think there's small teams of teams, and even within, even within, say, an AFL team that has, I know most of you guys are probably down there in Melbourne, but in an AFL team, there's even teams within teams. So you've got your midfielders, your forwards, and your backs. Or in football, you've got the same. You've got midfielders. So this concept of teams, I don't think we explore it in a way that we should. And the first point I make is, are you a real team or are you just a high-performing group? And there is a very big difference. So a real team, for mine, is you have to be interdependent. So you need to rely on each other. So if you don't rely on someone else, you're not really a team. There's not together. So you have to be all committed to a common purpose, and that's also a point down there. There needs to be a compelling purpose or a common purpose that where everyone can make a commitment. And then lastly, you've got the right people. And what I mean by the right people, there's diverse enough skills that you can arrive at the compelling purpose. So a lot of the time, my beginning work with people is to challenge organisations of, are you, like when you talk about teams, are you talking about teams the right way? And the example I use of this, if you're a fighter pilot and you're driving and you're flying to battle, you'll fly in squadron, right? They'll fly in a group. But as soon as battle begins, they're all kind of save yourself type of approach. So they're not really a team. Like, they have to fight their own battles within the battle. So they're totally dependent on each other, independent of each other. Whereas if you're a real team, you can't do it without each other. So the real team actually exists in the cockpit. So two men and women, or two men, or whoever's in the cockpit together. That's the real team, because they can't work unless they work together in unison. They can't get their job done. So that's the same with sailing boat. If people on that boat don't do their job, or a rowing boat or in a kayak, if they don't do their job, it doesn't work. So a real team for me is the starting point is, do you rely on each other? Because we confuse teams a lot. Teams really mean the only way to get to where we want to go is we're totally dependent on each other. And that's for me the first point. I've also got the concept of when we're talking about teams, is that the things that support a team, or the things that are in place, are around what I call supportive organisational context. So teams need to be, and sport really taught me this. These models come from sport, right? When you're an athlete. Like, I look at my journey. I paddled a kayak pair, so K2, but what was around me was a supporting organisation to help me be at my best. So we had I had a sports scientist, I had a strength and conditioner, I had a coach who did all the technical work with us. There was a massage therapist and a dietitian. So there's this supporting organisational context that helps teams be at their best. So, and a lot of the time we don't develop that structure well enough that enhances our teams. We also don't think about, well, what's the structure by which the team is supposed to grind out its results in? So what's their ways of working, and what are the things that enables the team to fit into the larger organisation and be very useful in delivering results for the organisation. So teams for me are the most exciting part of the work we do. And if you're not involved in teams, then you're missing out of being the joy of being really useful to the people around you. And I don't know if there's a better, again, I come back to it, I don't know if there's a better feeling of being accountable for something within a team that we're trying to achieve and delivering on that. And as a leader, is there a greater gift than creating the conditions so that team can be at their best and I can be at my best within that? I don't know if there's a greater gift that we can give people. So I work very hard to help and serve people so that we can create those conditions and create those teams that they're good. Any questions? Come on, there must be some. Go on, Terry.
Dan, are you able to give us an example of, perhaps in a corporate scene, of where you've engaged with a team and transformed them? So the before and the after of a leadership team in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
Sports I get, but the corporate one.
No. So there's plenty even now that I'm using, Terry. So we can take we can take some work I'm doing now. So I'm doing some work at the moment with so they're owned offshore. The spin-off of a lot of the things that were in place from a cultural perspective were left over from the ways of working being a government business. So they had some conditions that were created then that weren't useful to the challenge that they face now. So the executive team, when we looked at the executive team, first and foremost, the executive team was too big. So there was 13 people in that team. So the first thing I did with the CEO was say, hey, look, is there a core group of people that are vitally important to your success and to the success of this team? What's that core? And he named 4 people, so it ended up being there's this inner core of 5 people. So the first job was to make that change so that there's 2 parts to the executive team without massive disruption. So you can imagine that was very difficult, right? Because they're egos and self-interests. But the first part was to have that team tight and then build the supporting mechanism around that team, which was the rest of the executive, right? So, and we worked through a series of analysis and workshops so that where we've landed now is the team understand how they be useful to each other. And there's this core of the executive, I suppose, that are fundamental. Without them and their teams doing well, they don't what I call grow, crush and sell enough for them to be profitable. So that group is vital, but it doesn't mean the outside of the executive, or what I call the supporting team of the executive, are any less important. It's just they have a completely different role in driving success, right? So we made this transition over a 6-month period, and there's still, don't get me wrong, there's still some interesting conversations because so General Counsel feels that they should be in the core, right? But they're really, really important for governance and reporting back. And what we say to the fellow who's General Counsel and vital to help us cover risk and all the corporate law that goes with the entity, but you're not at the core of the result. You're not at the core of it. So you're a supporting mechanism to help the team be enhanced. So there's this journey that's required to reshape how the team thinks about itself. But there's a perfect example of went from 11, there's a core 5 now with a supporting team around it. They're all still called the executive, but within that, they have very clear functions. You've got this team and then this beautiful core that's wrapped around it. And that core then is supported by this team that's wrapped around it. And they then lead their functional areas. They lead their functional areas with the support of the rest of the executive. So it's a completely different approach. And interestingly, we've just had the first engagement score, and the first set of green shoots are coming through is that the direct reports to the executive team, we've seen a little bit of an uptick, right? Really early days, but we've seen an early uptick, which is, for me, the first type of green shoots that'll probably take 18 months before they're really humming. So there's one example. We haven't hit the scoreboard yet, Terry. So the results at this point, they haven't impacted, but again, they're long-term strategies, right, around investment in capital works and reshaping how they do their logistics. They're all these special projects have come out of the team operating differently now.
I wondered, with the core team, are they really all leaders, and therefore they're the hard ones to get to mesh and rely on each other? Because I worked in a hospital for many years, and quite often, for instance, the medical director, the nursing director might have been in alliance, but the manager, who was more on the financial side, was often offside with them. They were all natural leaders, but they weren't all natural core group. So is that a real challenge?
Oh,
do you find that in sport?
Yeah, so if I go back to the model here, see this there's a compelling purpose I'm talking about at the point of the inside that. So there's this here is the compelling purpose. So without firstly structuring the real team, which is at the top of the inside, the next drop down is this compelling purpose. So what is something that will help them bind together to work together, right? In the best interests of in your instance, in the customer care. So what's compelling first? What's something that's going to hold them all and work and want them work together for that, to put their self-interest aside, right? But if they can't put their self-interest aside, I look at it, they're not the right people. That's why you've got to get the right people on. If they're not, they're not the right people. If the leadership is about them and their thing, then they're not the right person to be part of a team that wants to do special stuff.
I sometimes think the health department makes that very difficult, because the manager's responsible for all the financial things. The medical and nursing staff are responsible for success in patients and helping patients. And often the two don't seem to work well together. So, I mean, I'm sure the same sort of thing happens in sport, that sometimes it's to do with the fans and the money that's available that some are concerned about, but others are just concerned about the well-being of the team and getting the team working well. So I'm sure there's misalignment sometimes with that.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely. And if there's an environment where there's competing interests, then it takes a lot of soul searching, a lot of work together to arrive at what's something that's going to bind us. Like in some instances, you can see that there's actually competing interests, and that those competing interests, like finance is trying to save money, and care in your scenario, the nurses are trying to make sure that they're surrounding the patient with and giving service to the doctor. And so there's care around that. So and that costs money, right? So what it would seem like is that there's competing interests.
Yeah.
But if we just step back and go on, hey, here's all we've got. How do we, as a team, make the absolute most of that? If we've got $1, how do we make it go 5? And Olympic sports are very good at that. We step back and go, hey, look, we've, like some rugby league players and AFL players get paid more than there is funding for my sport a year. So one person, like my sport, gets annual funding of about just a bit over $1 million. So, and they make that go to athletes and trips to Europe and buy boats, and so, but they step back and go, what's their biggest bang for the buck here? Where can we make that work? And I think that's the same. Same when you're developing teams, is you've got to stop, put your self-interest aside. Very difficult to do that, right?
That's excellent. And I think we should be talking with hospitals as well.
Dan, can I pull together a couple of themes that you've touched on there? That you've been talking a lot about teams. Right back at the beginning of your talk, you talked about the importance of having someone to hold yourself to account, or hold you to account. So how does that also turn across and fit in with teams? How does a team, or together or individually, get held to account?
Yeah, so in teams that are high performing, one of the conditions we set up, or one of the things that we experience in a high performing team, is accountability. And accountability is a tension or a pressure building tool. So it puts people under pressure, right? So in a performance environment, then you can expect, so work, I think any work is a performance environment because there are expectations on you to deliver for others, right? So as soon as there's expectations to have a particular standard of behaviour or to deliver results, then I think it's a performance environment because you need to perform for others, right? And in doing so, there's pressure. The best pressure comes from accountability, right? So, and here's a different view. I think accountability is weaponized by so many leaders. It becomes a punitive measure, right? Whereas I think accountability is actually, if I care deeply for you, Jeffrey, then I'll hold you to account at work, right? Because I care for your best and I know that there's better available for you and from you. And in doing so, I'll put that pressure on, but I'll help you be successful at the same time. So I have a different view on accountability. You can't, if we don't have accountability, it's very hard to celebrate success. It's very hard for leaders to coach. It's very hard to validate people and say, hey, well done, I've really noticed your effort, you know, and thanks. It's very hard to do that if there's no accountability. It's very hard to, as a group, collectively work towards something and be useful to the people that I'm working with in a team. So accountability for me is such an important part, and it's a really important condition for teams, right? So I don't think you can be a team without being accountable to those around you. And there's a relationship between personal responsibility and my levels of accountability in the workplace. And this accountability, I think, is when you're under pressure or when there's a level of expectation and those expectations have been transferred to you and you deliver for others, it's a really special feeling. So I think it's a vital component of our working lives. So I drag that back to then from a mindset perspective, how do we help people cope and deal and be good under pressure, as opposed to so many workplaces are trying to remove accountability and make it easy. I actually think it's the opposite. Like, your growth comes from the hardness or the harshness of accountability and being good enough to rise above the pressure that you're under. And we should teach that and talk about it. But it's not a punitive measure. It's a wonderful thing that comes from caring about someone else's success.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's really been sort of a fascinating view of both your own personal journey and of the sort of message that you're now sharing with both large and small organizations, and to have someone who's working at that top level in some of the corporate parts of the world has been a fascinating insight, I think, for us.
Great. Wonderful. I appreciate being invited, and hopefully it's been of use to you and there's some things you can take away to be helpful to others. So I appreciate the invite, and enjoy the rest of your evenings, and thank you.
Thank you.